Hey there, now it's time to talk about the flowers. So, this may or may not be very important to you. It's different for every bride. So, sometimes flowers are very important to brides because all of their bridesmaids are going to be holding bouquets and flowers. Same with the bride, you'll be holding your bouquet in photos, and so you might want to spend more money on flowers because of that reason. Or maybe your decorations are going to incorporate a lot of flowers, and so maybe you're wanting to spend more in this area. But to some brides, flowers aren't super important because they aren't going to last after the wedding day. And those brides might say, I'd rather spend more money in the photography and videography department because that is what's going to tangibly last past the wedding day. So it's different for every bride. But one thing that I want you to start brainstorming about is, are you wanting for sure real flowers, or are you even willing to consider artificial flowers? So I've seen this done and it looked awesome. One of my friends had artificial flowers for her wedding, and so we each had a bridesmaid's bouquet of artificial flowers, and it worked so well because they were able to make them ahead of time and just bring them in for the wedding. And it was so awesome. And then we got to keep them after the wedding and they looked beautiful. So even though you may be able to tell a little bit, you could not tell with these. You can get very lifelike artificial flowers. I for sure though would recommend using artificial petals for the flower girl because rose petals can actually stain carpets. So if they're throwing out real rose petals and then you're walking in the rose petals with heels, or guests walk on the rose petals exiting the ceremony, that could be staining the carpet as people walk on them. So I would for sure go with artificial petals for the flower girl. And there are very lifelike artificial rose petals that you can purchase. So that's a very, very safe bet for you. I would also, for artificial flowers, recommend getting a second bouquet for the bride. So normally at the wedding reception, the bride will toss her bouquet to all of the single ladies at the reception. And you don't want to be tossing your bridal bouquet because you could be spending a lot of money on those bridal bouquets. So I bought a artificial little bouquet from Hobby Lobby, and you can toss that. Now, talking about flowers, you may or may not know a lot of information about them, so I'm just going to share what I know. So the bridal bouquet is fancier. So this is going to cost more than all of the other bridesmaids bouquets, and it's going to be bigger, obviously. So what I did for my bridal bouquet is I had rhinestones and bling added to it to make it a little more my personality. And there was a white satin wrap added to it around the stems. It looked really beautiful. And my bridesmaids bouquets were lovely as well. They weren't as fancy, they weren't as big, and they weren't as expensive. But what I decided to do was, for our head table at our wedding reception, I had empty vases sitting in front of the head table spread out, and I just had a string of fairy lights in each vase. So what I did was I had each of my bridesmaids, when they entered the wedding reception venue and got announced, then I had them put their bouquet in one of the vases. So then it doubled purpose-wise. So they got to use it during the ceremony and hold them. And then during the reception, it added decoration and there was no extra cost, and it made the head table look beautiful. So that is always an idea you can incorporate. And like I said, it saved money on flowers, so you didn't have to buy double. Normally, there is a flower delivery to have them bring it to the church. Instead, you can have a wedding coordinator for the day of go ahead and pick them up. So I had a gal where I designated all of the duties for the wedding day to her. That way she could check things off of the checklist that I created for her ahead of time to see if everything was there on time or if everyone was scheduled and arrived at the certain time they were supposed to be there, or if the music was playing at this time, or the list of flowers that were supposed to be picked up and who gets which one. So she actually went and picked up the flowers the morning of the wedding and brought them to the church. And then I had her, as well as the two ladies for the host couples, help pin the flowers on the groomsmen and the father of the bride, father of the groom, and the officiant and the host couples. And anyway, it is important to have someone also designated to help pin on the flowers because it does take time. So if you can have 1, 2, or 3 people pinning on the flowers, that will help things go quickly, especially if you are wanting to have your wedding photos taken before the wedding ceremony starts. It's efficient to have multiple people pinning on flowers. Additionally, it's important if you're wanting to save money to make sure that you purchase in-season flowers, and local flowers. So like in season. If you're wanting a specific flower that only blooms a certain time of year, then it's going to be really hard for this floral shop to get them in. They may have to get shipped in. I'm not really sure how all that works because we went with in-season and local flowers. I do know that that makes them a lot cheaper than having them imported, or they're not as rare because they're local. If they're a rare flower, then the price is definitely going to be more. So I just want you to be aware of that. So for the bridal bouquet and the bridesmaids bouquets, we had a focal flower, then we had a secondary flower, then we had tertiary flowers, like a third option maybe. And then we also had fillers. So we had baby's breath as fillers. We added some greenery as well, so that can make them appear larger. Like I said, bridal bouquets are more extravagant. So I've seen bridal bouquets range from about $50 up to $300. You're like, wow, that's a lot of money for one bouquet. I know. Bridesmaids bouquets typically range from $25 to $100. So there are different types of corsages as well. So normally the mother of the bride will have a corsage, the mother of the groom will have a corsage, as well as a grandma, or even the wedding coordinator, the wedding planner, or the singer, or the keyboardist, or the guest book attendants, or any of the ladies will wear a corsage if they are affiliated with the wedding party, but not actually in the wedding. So there are wrist corsages that ladies will wear on their wrists, or there are pin-on corsages. So like for my mom or my grandma or James's mom, they had wrist corsages. It looked really pretty. And then we had, I believe, a lot of other pin-on corsages. So they wore them on their dresses, and those went to the ladies in the host couples, for our singer, for the wedding coordinator for the day of, our guest book attendants, the church coordinator. But corsages, if they are ladies, would be used for like readers that read scripture during the wedding, or guest book attendants if you have someone, a friend or a family member, cutting the cake or serving the cake at your reception, they would get a corsage. Candle lighters, singer, piano player. So there can be a lot of additional costs for corsages. Let's continue. So for my bridal bouquet, I used calla lilies and white roses with baby's breath. And I already mentioned definitely using artificial flowers for the flower girls in their baskets. And let's see. So we'll talk about boutonnieres real quick as well. So Boutonnieres are like a single flower with a little bit extra greenery or baby's breath attached to them, and they are used for all of the guys. So for the guys, the groom gets a boutonniere, as well as the groomsmen and all of the ushers, the officiant in some cases also, host couples, the guys, the men in the host couples. If you have guys reading scripture, or a guest book attendant, or a cake cutter, candle lighter, singer, piano player, they would also get a boutonniere. And the father of the groom, father of the bride, grandfathers, so there are a lot of different boutonnieres that can come into play. You're seeing how the flower expense can add up. So they aren't levels of boutonnieres though. Like the groom, like James, had the same boutonniere style as an usher, as the officiant, so it was just a standard style, and they were $9 each. So like I mentioned earlier, have someone designated to help pin on flowers before pictures. Sometimes there are clips for flowers, sometimes it's a legit pin. So hopefully people know how to do that from prom and dances in high school, but sometimes people don't know how to do that, especially the guys have never really done that before. So if you have some ladies to help, just be careful if it's a pin that they are putting their hand underneath the shirt. That way they aren't stabbing the guy with the pin in the flower. That can really hurt, so be very cautious. Let's see. You can also use flowers to add additional decorations for the ceremony or for the reception. So you can incorporate flowers into all of these decorations. You can have pew bows, but incorporate flowers into that. Altar arrangements looks beautiful. You might have an arch with flowers on it, or aisle runners for decorations. Other ceremony decorations could be like candelabras, unity candle, guest book stand, but you could have flowers on the table when you are having guests sign in. There are so many different options. Like I mentioned, flowers can get very expensive. I do want you to know that. And then once they die, you can't get any money out of them, obviously. So maybe you want to consider a different type of centerpiece or a different type of decoration, because then you would be able to get some money back out of the decorations. For example, if you choose as a centerpiece to have a lantern instead of flowers, you're going to get a lot more for your money with a lantern. $20 lantern versus a $20 flower arrangement for a centerpiece is going to be drastically different. You're not going to get much for a $20 flower arrangement as a centerpiece. But my point with this is you're able to sell that lantern after the wedding is over. You might be able to sell it to a bride who's getting married soon, and then you'll make some of that money back. As you can see, this Cinderella carriage back here, I used Cinderella carriages as the centerpiece, and then I used artificial petals for flowers to be scattered around the table, and that worked really well. So additional alternatives as centerpieces, you could use candles, vases, picture frames. You could do a do-it-yourself project. I've seen glass bottles like spray painted, metallic. They're used as centerpieces, so there are a lot of ideas. All right, so we are going to discuss questions that you can ask the floral shop. So quickly, I just want to make you aware of ways to save money with flowers. So like I already mentioned, choose flowers that are in season. They will be more readily available and affordable. Embrace filler flowers like baby's breath and greenery that will make your bouquet appear to be bigger and more beautiful, but it won't be as expensive. definitely repurpose those bridesmaids bouquets to be used at the head table in vases. And artificial is the way to go if you want to make sure that they're not going to die or wilt in the heat. And let's see. Additionally, for the flower girls, since we are talking about them, I definitely mentioned that you should use the artificial. But I've also seen aisle runners used in ceremonies before, where it's a piece of fabric that you roll out. And so the flower girls are supposed to drop the rose petals on this aisle runner. And then you're able to quickly roll it up with the flower petals on it. That's an option if you're like, no, I really want to use the real petals. Make sure that's okay with the church ceremony venue as well. Otherwise, if you don't use an aisle runner, just be aware that someone's going to have to be in charge of picking up flower petals after the ceremony, and someone has to be assigned to do this. So that is all the information I have for you. Moving on to the questions that you should ask a floral shop to see if they are the right fit for you for your wedding. So one thing you can ask them is how long they've been doing weddings for. So how long have they been making these bridal bouquets and the corsages and boutonnieres, or the arrangements for weddings? How long have they been in this industry? Ask them if they take on more than one wedding in a single day. So obviously with flowers, they have a limited amount of time that they will be looking beautiful. And so what happens is if they choose to have more than one wedding in a single day, they're going to be extra busy making double the amount of flowers for these wedding parties, and they may be overbooked, have too much on their schedule, because they can't make these boutonnieres and corsages and bouquets and arrangements too far in advance, because they have to be fresh and look great for all the wedding photos. So maybe ask if they take on more than one wedding in a single day. You can also chat with them and be very upfront with them and say, hey, our budget for flowers is approximately this amount of money. What are suggestions of flowers and flower arrangements that are available within this price range? And that way you don't get your heart set on some extravagant flower that's going to be so much money and jack up those prices way more than what you're willing to spend on flowers. So you could go into it right up front and say, hey, what can I get for this amount of money? And they will be able to suggest flowers for you. You could say, hey, our wedding month is June, or our wedding month is September, whatever your month is for your wedding. Just say, our wedding month is fill in the blank. What flowers are in season during that month? They may have better access to certain flowers, which would lower the cost of all of your flower purchases. Also say the color scheme for our wedding is fill in the blank. So if it's blue, or if it's pink, or if it's red, just say the color scheme is this, because you don't want all of your bouquets being some random color than the bridesmaids' dresses and the centerpieces. So you want everything to be cohesive and look aesthetically pleasing. So just say the color scheme for our wedding is this. Are there any flowers within our budget that match that color scheme? Do you make mock-ups or samples prior to the wedding day? Or do you have examples you can show us? So they might already have one made. If you stop into their flower shop, they might be working on one for an upcoming wedding that you could see a similar mock-up design to picture how big it is or what is all included in it. They also may have photos as like a portfolio of their work for past weddings. All right. Ask them what they charge for bridal bouquets. Obviously, there's quite a range, so it might be if you add extra bling or extra factors into it, that will raise the cost. What do they charge for bridesmaids bouquets, boutonnieres, corsages, altar arrangements, centerpiece arrangements? You get the idea. Is there a delivery fee for the flowers? What steps do you need to take in order to reserve their services for your wedding day? Is there a contract to sign? I always recommend having something signed in writing. That way it can be documented. You don't want them to forget about your wedding day. You want them to have something on file, on record for them to refer to. Also, make sure that you verify with them when you're making the order that they have the exact details and how many flowers for the ushers, how many flowers for the groomsmen, how many bridesmaids bouquets do you need. Have all those details ready and double checked. You don't want someone to be without a flower. Definitely don't want that to happen. Ask them what the amount is required for the deposit and when the remaining balance is due. It might not be due until 2 weeks before the wedding. Every flower shop is different. What forms of payment do they accept? Is there an additional service charge for paying with a credit card? Those electronic card payments can sometimes add 1 to 2% of the total price. And then here is one more thing that I want you to consider. Sometimes brides have their bridal bouquet preserved. So you can ask this flower shop if they offer preservation services for the bridal bouquet, and if so, how much do they charge for that? I would have loved to have that done, but this is also something to take in consideration. If you're having a wedding not in your hometown, I would not have been able to transport the bridal bouquet because I was out of state. We were traveling for our honeymoon after that, and so there was no way I could carry flowers with me. So I decided not to, and I wasn't like a huge bride loving flowers. Like, I cared more about the photos and the video. And so, but it may be very important to you. And so if that is important to you, ask them if they provide preservation services for your bridal bouquet. I think I covered everything regarding flowers. Hopefully you have a good groundwork laid there that you can start looking for examples of ideas that you love for bridal bouquets and bridesmaids bouquets. Definitely you can bring in photos for a florist to see if this is possible. Say like, I love this bouquet. Is this going to be in my price range for my budget? And they'll say, yeah, definitely. Or that's a little bit too much for your price range. We could take this out and we could do this instead. So if you have something like an example, a visual example for them to go off of, that will be very helpful. So please continue on to the next section.